overjoyed to have the opportunity to provide an introduction to this tape about prisoners of war during World War II. It come to us as a result of the work of Bob Eckman, an Iowa National Guardsman who mobilized during World War II and had the misfortune of being captured in North Africa during the African campaign, and ultimately ended up in Poland at what was called Oflag 64.
In February 1943, the 168th Regimental Combat Team, part of the 34th Division, or Red Bull Division, faced the concentrated power of the German Afrika Korps at Faid Pass and the Battle of Kasserine. Located on forward positions too far advanced to be reinforced and too isolated to withdraw, elements of the 168th Infantry were surrounded by numerically superior armored forces. After being cut off for 3 days and being only partially successful in breaking through the enemy lines, many soldiers of the 168th Infantry, mostly Iowans and other Midwesterners, were captured. The officers were separated from the enlisted men and transported to prisoner of war camps in Italy, Germany, and Poland. For them, the war was over, but a new war was beginning, the personal war of prison camp life.
I'd always wanted to do something for the guys, and some of them wrote books and some of them did different things, you know, to remember the camp. And I wasn't an artist and I wasn't a musician, and I didn't know what to do about it. And so finally I was talking to Colonel Rolfus, and I said, how would you like to have a model of Oflag 64 for your museum? And he said he'd like to have it. And I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and build one. Well, I was captured in North Africa at Faid Pass. Colonel Drake, our senior officer, and about 3 fellows was in a different camp than I was. So they moved out there on June the 6th, and that was 1943. So we moved out there, and the group that I was with got there about the 8th. And so that's how we got to Oflag 64. This German colonel, when we first got there, had us formed up and talked to us through an interpreter. He could not speak a word of English. And he told us then that he had been an officer in the German army for 40 years. So our senior American officer, Colonel Drake, who was an old-time regular Army officer, he jumped onto that. And when they called him over for conference, why, he gave this German and one old soldier another old soldier bit, and the old man ate it up. And it wasn't very long till Colonel Drake had him eaten out of his hand. This is the German commandant's house. This is Colonel Oberst Schneider, and he had the fear of God in these troops. When we first got there, he formed these troops up and said, these are American officers coming in here, and you're not to touch them except to keep them from escaping. Now, this building was one of the original buildings there of the school. And when we first opened the camp, we filled this building up first. And the senior American officer lived in this camp, or in this building. Over in this part, in the basement, the basement is only on this section right here, was the central kitchen. And they had great big brick stoves and a big kettle sitting in the middle of the stove, and that was what they cooked what made hot water. This little church was one of the original buildings, and it was very small, and Father Brock Mass in there for the Catholic people, and he held church services for the non-Catholics, and it didn't matter whether you were Catholic or what. Father Brock could answer your questions, and he was a real spiritual leader of this camp, and he was a great comfort to a lot of them. These 4 buildings here in this corner, they're all barracks. And the fellas would make curtains out of material and blankets or whatever they could get, and then we called them cubicle. And that is what we called the hospital. And Captain Bergeson from Des Moines, Iowa was the head doctor over there. We had 2 or 3 doctors there, and the dentists, and they all lived in this place. Well, Bergie, I always accused him of curing more people with his little laugh and grin than he did with his pills, because he had a personality that wouldn't quit. This building was divided down about where the ridge is, and on the front side over here, they had about 25 or 30 Russian prisoners. They were all young fellas in their 20s and early 30s. And they'd come, the Germans would come in and get them to work outside the camp. This side here was the tin stores, what we called the tin stores. And then when we got stuff like cigarettes, our cigarettes were stored there. These 2 buildings is where the guard company lived. And in one of the buildings, they had a solitary confinement cell. This building was a barracks, actually, but we converted it to a theater. And that's where these plays and band concerts and things like that went on. And we had musicians out there. A lot of them were good. And we had good actors. They put on The Man That Came to Dinner. And the guy that played that part, I can't remember who he was now, but he was just as good as Monty Woolley was in the original. One time they brought in, I don't know how many cases, but it was a big bunch of cheese. And it stink. Boy, it just run you out of the house, see? And so the guys didn't want it in the mess hall, so they had a bench outside, and we stacked it up on this bench. And I think it was probably a kilogram in each block, because their blocks were pretty good sized. And so I got to thinking about it, see what's inside. Because the outside was just slimy. It was just slimy and just stink. And so I took a block of it into my room and scraped it off and cut into it. And inside was some of the best tasting cheese you ever ate. This was a Smoky Joe. And we got the idea from the British, but the ones they had didn't work very good, but we improved on the design. It's made from tin cans that came in the Red Cross food parcel. Around the inside the rim, there's little holes. If you look down in there, you can see the grate. Now the grate is down below, and it's airtight between the 2 cans. When you fire it, the air comes in here and goes up between the cans and gets heated up. And then it comes out these holes as a blue flame. And if you had a pot of beans on there, you just fold this up and throw it in there. And if you had enough cardboard, and we had plenty of time, well, you could boil a pot of beans on there. Captain Bernie Bolton from Council Bluffs, he was our inventor. And he was always figuring out something. So he was built a loom, and he got some boards and about 4 inches apart on the edge, and he had a lot of nails in it, and he's making a loom. This is a piece of material that Bernie made on that loom, and you'll notice it's in little strips, and that's the width of the loom, and then he sewed them together. He had this sitting on the table, and he worked at it quite a bit. So they had a Gestapo search one time, and he had it sitting on the table, and so when Gestapo came in there, one guy said, "What's that?" And Bernie said, "Das is a tunnel marking machine." he looked at that, and he couldn't figure out how you could make a tunnel with it. But they didn't take it, but he didn't know for sure whether he should confiscate that thing or not. Well, the first winter, there wasn't snow there to even bother sweeping the sidewalk. But when we evacuated, the snow was on the level ground, was waist deep. And when we moved out, it was 20 below zero, or 22 below zero. And the German commandant just marched us right out in with the refugees. And if it hadn't been for these refugee wagons, we couldn't have made it, because the snow was just so deep, you couldn't get off the path. But they had kept that snow chopped down and packed down till we could go.
On January 21st, 1945, Oflag 64 was evacuated in the face of pressure from advancing Russian forces. Leaving 86 medically unfit men to be liberated by the Russians, the remaining 1,471 men left on foot for a 345-mile trip, arriving in Hammelburg on March 9th. After an abortive attempt at liberation by U.S. armored forces, most of the camp was marched to Moosburg, approximately 90 miles distant. It was here that the men of Oflag 64, together with 30,000 other Allied prisoners of war, were freed by U.S. forces on April 29, 1945. Over the next few weeks, they were returned to the United States by boat. After 26 months as prisoners, it now could be truly said, for them, the war was over.
Kiss me once, then kiss me twice, then kiss me once again. It's been a long, long time. Haven't felt like this, my dear, since can't remember when. It's been a long, long time. You'll never know how many dreams I dream about you, or just how empty they all seem without you. So kiss me once, then kiss me twice, then kiss me once again. It's been a long